So I'm leaving you now with Javier.
Thank you very much, and thank all of you for being here. I know I'm between lunch and a sunny swim by the lake, so appreciate you guys still hanging out, which is great. And also, just to make the time to listen to someone that it's not really a vegetation or a person, like a tree people. I'm more of a coastal person, but I hope after today's presentation that will all make sense why I am standing here. And I'm talking about mapping trees at the speed of light. So it's kind of like something I've started doing the last few years. So hopefully you'll enjoy this. First, I'll just to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we're meeting at, the Genevara people, and I would like to pay respects to elders past, present, and emergent. So has anyone wondered how many stars are out there? How many? Infinite. How many stars? But you've gone through that stage, right? Like I remember as a kid just thinking about that type of stuff, like how many stars, or like how many grains of sand on a beach. How many trillions? At least, definitely more than 1,000. So yeah, I mean, it just like haunted me for a long, long time. Just trying to figure these type of things, and like one of my sons told me, it's just like he gets dizzy when he thinks too much about these things, and definitely you might get dizzy. Um, so instead of these like super profound, like unreachable questions, maybe an easier one, and I'm sure all of you have done this, but how many trees? When you're walking, you're going through a bushwalk, or even like, if you're anything like me, you're walking around and you're just going like, I wonder, like how many trees are just there? Have you gone through that? No? Am I the only one? Anyways, so that's something like I'm like super keen on under or trying to answer. And I am a geographer, so most of my job is just to map stuff, right? So when you think about this type of quantifying questions, like how many things are out there, I'm instantly thinking, can we really do this from a map? That's what I keep thinking all day long. I do know there's at least 130,000 trees that have been planted here in Woodford since, I reckon, like for the last 30 years maybe. So at least we have an indication of, a number. So that's not how many trees are there all throughout Woodfordia, but at least we know how many trees have been planted. And I'm sure after today, that number is going to get bigger. So that's amazing. Now, I was telling you that, well, first, why, right? Like, because that's what my boss will ask me. It's like, great, how many trees, but why? Like, why would you spend time, effort, like money on just figuring out how many trees? And it's actually a quite important question because trees, well, I'm sure here we all know why trees are important, right? But one of the things that have been becoming quite important is to understand the carbon budget around the world. So globally, how much carbon are we actually emitting? That's a pretty, if not one of the most important questions for us right now. It's understanding that carbon budget because we know the impacts of, if we put out too much carbon up in the atmosphere, then we get like accelerating climate change and all of the things we are actually seeing. And we'll be seeing more in the next few years. So knowing how many trees actually relates directly to how much biomass is there. And knowing how much biomass, then we can kind of like estimate how much carbon is being stored on those trees. So believe it or not, there's a massive sub-discipline in science that just kind of like focuses on answering that question, how many trees, right? Now, I was mentioning that, and according to my bio, like I am a geomorphologist, so like little to do with trees, really. I'm definitely not your tree person. I'm more of like a coastal type of person. Like I spend a lot of time on the beach. I was on the beach this morning before heading here, but I do love Woodford. Yeah, I love being here. It's a different environment, different community. So I love being here. I do a lot of research around coastal stuff, like understanding how a beach changes, for example. That's one of the main things I do. Um, Alfred, you all experienced tropical cyclone Alfred. So a lot of my work is around that, understanding how much of that sun goes and comes back and all of that stuff. But I am a geographer, so I actually do map things out a lot. And if you see a few of those little photos, can you actually see that? Oh, great, because I have like heaps of visuals. I don't like talking too much. And the thing is, like, if I start talking like, if I get excited, right, something I like talking about, I will start talking really fast, and then the accent kicks in, and you are the ones that suffer, so sorry about, but then the opposite is like, I can try and talk really slowly, and then I become very boring. So I try to strike a balance there. But the thing is, I do kind of like do a lot of this mapping, and I use a lot of technology to do this mapping. So in the recent years, I've been using drones to do a lot of my mapping because it's fun, it's easy, and you can get amazing stuff out of drones. And there's a lot of theory behind that. So it's not just like I just turn the drone and just goes out and flies, mostly, but then there's a lot of things. And mostly I love drones because you can see things from above, and I love that. I love having that vantage point. It's quite different. Like when you see things from above, they just, they're quite different. And I love this guy. So this French guy, hundreds of years ago. So what is that, 1858? So he jumped on a balloon. So he was one of these guys that, loved the idea of flying. And he just jumped on one of these hot air balloons and went above Paris and took a photo, which was like groundbreaking. So that photo was the first photo taken from up high. And it was the first time you could see that vantage point, right? So imagine that, because I'm assuming like most of you have gone on planes these days, so you've used like Google Earth or whatever. Like that's kind of like common. Today it's quite common, but back in the day, if you weren't a bird, right, you didn't see things from above that much. So I find that fascinating. And it's the same principle. You put a camera on these drones and you're just seeing things from above, right? And then you can map them out. So we use this thing called photogrammetry. Anyone has a clue of what photogrammetry is? What is it? Like just simple, like the simplest definition. Exactly. You're just measuring things with light. That's literally the definition of photogrammetry, right? You're measuring things from light. So you're drawing with light, so taking a photo, and then you're measuring from that, right? And photogrammetry is amazing because you can measure stuff on big areas, right? Like if you have like a map of a large area, then you can measure anything, basically, using this. But in the past, so when I talk about the past, it's maybe 100 years ago or maybe later, maybe back in the 50s or 1940s, 1950s, having a camera from above wasn't that easy. It was super expensive. So you used to have like planes, like usually from the militaries, like flying up with cameras, mapping out countries, right? Like that was something that no one had, like not everyone had access to. And you needed like really expensive cameras and you needed a plane and stuff. So it wasn't that easy. And that's why we kind of like, I remember when I started studying, having those aerial maps was not something easy or cheap to have. But then if you fast forward to like the 1970s, this guy, I never know how to pronounce his name, but I'm assuming it's something like Shimon Alman, something like that, Shimon Alman. Anyways, back in 1979, what he came up was a really smart thing, and we don't really need to like learn the details here, but basically what he did was he used computers to make this photogrammetry process easier. So now you didn't need a really expensive camera. You could just use a normal camera. You could still map out big areas. But he was kind of like very early on, and the stuff he proposed, which was called it was called structure from motion, right? You couldn't process it back then because computers were not that good. Now, A few decades later, computers became really good. So I remember, so this was what, 2008. I remember, so this is almost 20 years ago now, but I remember seeing this study where these people just grabbed photos of tourists, right? So they just grabbed photos from internet where tourists were taking photos of a something like the Colosseum in Italy, or something that a lot of people took a lot of photos from. And they took all of these photos and they could reconstruct like the whole object on 3D. That's structure from motion, which I found that like crazy amazing. So I remember seeing that and going like, well, now we can do that on most computers, right? You have drones. So now you can combine those and you can start mapping out things on 3D quite easily and quite cheaply. So it's been 10 years now since I've been doing that. And I still find it mind-blowing. So this is an example of the stuff they were doing. They were just reconstructing the whole Colosseum in Italy based on these photos. Now, this is kind of like where my path and Woodford merged, because having this technology at hand meant that I could do a lot of things around here. So, for example, Lake Gula. Who remembers when Lake Gula wasn't here? Right? So one of the things I did with these drones was to map out when they dug out Lake Gula and calculate the volume, because this is one of the things they needed to actually keep building the lake. So with a drone, that took me half an hour to do, right? So it's just, drone just flies, and I can reconstruct the 3D out of that super easy. So that's one of the things I did early on. More recently, I kind of like mapped, you know how the Grand has a new stage? So before they build that, they needed to make sure that the stage had a direct view to the bar, right? And that's kind of like, it's like, how do you do that, right? Like, so we were like, maybe if we map the 3D of the whole area, and then we do a little like 3D stage thing, right? Then I can just play with it until you can see the bar, and then that's how they built that stage, right? So different applications. More recently, like on the last festival, like this back December, I don't know if you were here, you probably noticed this drone flying. It wasn't me, but it was someone else. By the way, I don't like drones necessarily. Like I find them annoying. They're like big mosses. But so this drone actually flew all of the festival. So it took, what was that, 5,000 photos of the whole festival, right? Then from that, we can come up with a really nice image of the whole Woodfordia, right? But not only like a really good image, but also the 3D of Woodfordia. So that's what hopefully you are seeing there. So it's a full 3D model of Woodfordia, right? So that data set is just mind-blowing. Not only because now we have that full 3D, but also the resolution. So the size or the detail of that image is just crazy amazing. So recently, I've been playing with that and some of my students back at uni to do all sorts of things. So I just kind of like go like, what do you want to do to my students, right? Like, here's the data, what do you want to do? So we've been doing things like mapping out everything, like the different kind of like buildings, counting people, counting cars. So that's kind of like where you ask AI to count things for you. So you just put in the imagery, and then AI will count how many cars on the whole, how many tents. So all of these things are possible just because we have these amazing data sets. I'm getting, like, I will get back to vegetation very soon, but I'm just kind of like showing you the type of stuff you can do with this technology. Some other stuff we've been doing is actually mapping invasives around Woodfordia. So we mapped lantana and some pine. Again, I'm not slash pine. There you go. We've mapped slash pine. So we can do all of these type of applications. And of course, we tried to map how many trees, right? Like that was the original question. It's like, how many trees? So we're using this imagery and trying to map how many trees from the imagery. Now, if you can see that image, it's kind of good. If you see it the first time, you'll be like, that's amazing, right? And that took not much time. So you're like, that's great. But it's not great. Definitely not perfect, right? You can still see a lot of like gaps and stuff. So why? Even though this photogrammetry thing is amazing, right? And the drones and all that imagery is amazing, it has a lot of limitations. And one of them is that you're taking photos from above, right? And anything you can see, it can be mapped. But if you have a really dense canopy, then you cannot see kind of like the floor, right? Or even like through dense canopy, you cannot recognize each tree individually. So even though you can map some of this stuff where the canopy is not that dense, on some other areas, it doesn't perform as well. So what do we do? Because we have this technology, it's kind of working, but not really, right? And we still want to know how many trees are out there. So recently, again, and this is how technology just goes. It just like keeps developing, and then suddenly it's easy to access, and then suddenly you have this explosion of innovation, right? So lucky for us on this space, lasers have been great. So laser, right? We all know lasers, so we can use laser to actually map out stuff. And that's quite interesting because traditionally you could put this laser thing, which used to be massive, right? Like imagine like these sensors are like probably the size of this drum kit here, and you put it on a plane, and then the plane would fly, shooting like literally thousands of laser beams. They don't kind of like, they're not dangerous. They're just like, they don't even make you blind. Like this is good laser. It's good laser. So don't worry about it. Like this is not like Mr. What's the name of this guy? Anyway, that way, Dr. Evil Laser. This is good laser, right? And laser is amazing. So you can fly this plane, shoot laser, and it will create this like 3D data, like this point. We call it a point cloud. And what it does, it's a very simple principle because what it's doing is like shoots a beam, and as this beam bounces back, you know how much time that took, and we know the speed of light, so we can just determine that distance. So we can measure at the speed of light. Now, it's crazy amazing. Now lasers have become really small. So now you have lasers that are literally like this size, and you can chuck that on a drone. So it's even better. And the beauty about laser is that you can see through vegetation, right? So as opposed to photogrammetry, where you can only see kind of like the top of the canopy, with laser, you can actually go through vegetation. So I don't know if you've heard about kind of like this. So this is a comparison, right? That blue stuff, it's what you can see from photogrammetry. And then that orangey stuff is what you can see from laser. So literally, most of those trees can be mapped out. And probably you've heard on the news this, how they discover this new kind of like, or not new, but these ancient cities through forests, like, you know, the Mayas and all of this stuff. And that's exactly what they're using. It's just this laser on planes, and they fly across like this rainforest, and they're able to penetrate that vegetation and see what's down under, right? So it's amazing. We've used it. So now we can do a really good job, right? So you fly one of these laser things, and you get the data. It's so dense that you can literally extract each tree individually. So that's been groundbreaking, and it's been amazing. How much time do we have? Okay, we're good. And on top of that, you can combine this crazy laser data with some extra layers that can actually make you identify down to species level. So some research from TASI, like University of Tasmania, they were identifying Huon pines just using that laser and some other imagery. So you can imagine the possibilities of using these technologies, just amazing, especially for conservation. Now, if we bring it back to that carbon budget I was mentioning at the beginning, so originally what one of the important questions is how much of that carbon is being sequestered by trees, right? That's the question these days, or one of the questions these days. So how do we relate all of this stuff I've been talking to back to carbon budgets. And that's the way we estimate these carbon budgets, rely on a few things. So you can relate the height of the tree and the diameter of those trunks, right? And turn that into an estimate of biomass of that tree. And once you have that, you can turn that into estimates of carbon storage, right? So basically, what you need to measure is tree height and the diameter of those trunks, right? And we can do tree height really well, especially with laser. But that diameter, that's super hard to do, even for laser, right? Especially from laser from the air, right? Because it doesn't do that tree really well. So even to this day, people need to go out there and measure the diameter of those trees, right? Which is fun, but if you're talking thousands of trees, then it stops being fun, right? That's when you send your students to do that job. Like, that's what I do. That's actually my student, just doing that stuff. I love doing that, but it just takes too long, right? So the gap here is we need to figure out a way of measuring those trunks, right? That's what we need. If we could do that, then that means that we can estimate the carbon budget, right? So the way we do that is, yeah, those equations, that's easy to do. But the problem here is that even if you have a laser on one of these drones, you are not capturing that trunk with enough detail as you would need. So that's when we use a different approach. So instead of putting these lasers on a plane or a drone, you can put them on land, on a tripod, right? And now we have a terrestrial laser. So I just got one, by the way. Like this year, we got one of these things, and the first thing I surveyed was, of course, this structure here, because I'm like, how, if there's anything as complex is this structure, so let's see how that goes. And that's literally, I took it out of the box, drove up here, and that's the first thing I mapped, and it was amazing. Like, it's insane amazing. The thing is that you scan, and then it only does 10 meters. So then you have to walk and do 10 meters more, and then 10 meters more, right? So that's kind of like what I was doing. So if you're mapping this stuff, like that took me 15 minutes. That's all good, right? If you want a larger area, it takes longer. So this is, I hope you can see this because it's pretty amazing, but it's pretty dark too. But I did map a pretty decent chunk of trees just up by where the sign, the Woodford sign is, right? So it took me an hour and a half, just like moving this tripod from point to point, right? But then you capture this crazy 3D point cloud, right? So you are capturing like stuff all the way down to like grass blades and leaves, that level of detail. It's like, honestly, it's insane. So that you can see that Woodford sign in the background and stuff. So this is just an animation through that point cloud. And even though it took me a while, it was easy to do because the canopy is not that dense. Like, you can still walk through the trees, right? Like, it takes some time, but it's not too bad. But now if you imagine like a rainforest, a super dense rainforest, walking through that with a big tripod, this big piece of equipment, then that definitely stops being fun, right? So that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing next month, actually. So I'm not looking forward to it, but yeah. Anyways, so this terrestrial scanner will capture that lower part of that vegetation at amazing detail, right? So now you have amazing detail of that lower part with that terrestrial scanner, amazing detail of that upper part with like a drone and a laser, and then you can put like whatever, and you combine all of this, and suddenly what you have is this full-on 3D kind of like model of a forest, tree by tree, right? And once you have that, then it becomes very easy to map every tree and to get an estimate of the carbon budget, right? Now, the first thing, as a scientist at least, the first thing, because this is awesome, and that's how they will try and sell you this laser thing, which is not cheap, by the way. So they will go like, yeah, this is amazing. But first question is like, how amazing is this thing? That's the first question we need to ask. So I did ask that question. So I brought one of my students here, and I was like, okay, you go out there and you actually measure each one of these, diameters per each trunk, and then we'll compare, right, to see if it's actually good or not. So she did that, and it was actually amazing. Like, we detected 90% of the trees on a small plot, and to an accuracy of like less than 3 centimeters, right? So that's like very, very good. So now I have the confidence, and I know that this thing works, right? And we can do all of this amazing stuff with it. But of course, the problem is, if I want to do large areas, right, I'm not going to be walking every 10 meters throughout all of Woodfordia, right? If I want to count how many trees are throughout Woodfordia. So there's an issue of scale here, and that's always a problem. So how do we really make this work, right? Because that's what we want to do, is just make it scalable. You can count how many trees are on a small plot, but the real questions are like, how much, carbon is on a big area? How much carbon is Woodfordia sequestering? That's a very important question. It's like, after all of these efforts, like people planting trees and stuff, how much of that is actually being turned into carbon, which has actually a monetary value? So, these are important questions. So that's the research we're actually working on at the moment. And it's like, how do we combine all of these things, right? From measurements on the ground by people, like anyone can do this. Anyone can use those photos, like combine them with a laser, with the drone, with the airplane, right? And maybe by doing that, we can actually start answering questions like, how many trees are across Woodfordia? So that's what we are working on, and it's super exciting to be doing this. But we can go even further, and this is where things start getting really good. And they put a laser on a satellite, right? So now we have a laser on a tripod, on a drone, on an airplane, and now we have lasers on satellites, right? And these satellites, so one of them is called JEDI, the JEDI satellite, like full-on sci-fi stuff. And this thing actually goes around shooting good lasers, so it's not kind of like making anyone blind or killing anyone. It's just shooting laser and measuring stuff around the world all the time. We have that as we speak, right? So now that, makes me wonder, can we actually combine all of the scales now? Can we actually, use what we can learn on a really small plot where we are manually doing stuff? Can we extrapolate that to a bigger plot with laser, bigger with a drone and laser, even bigger, maybe even all the way up to the whole world, right? So now, kind of like, we are starting to contemplate the idea that we are capable of measuring all the trees in the world, right? Using this combination of things. And I love it because it still relies on the ground. So you still need measurements from people on the ground. So it's not like AI or satellites are stealing our jobs. You know how people go like, oh, AI is going to steal all of our jobs and stuff. That's not going to happen. Like we are always going to need some people on the ground. So though measuring the trees, manually is as important as measuring trees from satellites. We actually need all of these things, and that's quite a very, very exciting. So going back to the first question of, can we actually measure trees? I think, yeah, definitely, yes. Now we are measuring trees, we are counting each tree, we're using these lasers, so the jobs are it's becoming really fast. So now we can start dreaming about, how many trees are across the whole world, which, going back to that first question, is like how many grains of sand on a beach or how many stars on the sky. Like, I think this is that type of like really profound question. And now we're starting to kind of like being able to answer that. So yeah, very exciting times. And hopefully in the next few years, we start having a number, so we cannot just go like 1 trillion or whatever. Like we'll have an actual number of how many trees are out there. So yeah, hope you enjoy that, and thanks for coming. Any questions? Question?
With your terrestrial LiDAR, have you been able to calculate canopy bulk density by height above ground level?
Yes, so we can do that to a certain extent, right? So you can do that on the higher layers, but the more you go down, like with a terrestrial scanner, definitely, as long as your trees are not too tall. And that's where you start having these issues where you have to actually combine both like drone or airplane laser with terrestrial laser. Once you do that, then you have the whole profile, and then you can do you can do crazy things, like you can do stem orientation, you can do how many leaves are out there. So that level of detail, but it depends on the complexity of your vegetation, so how tall and how dense. And yeah, so then you can answer all of those questions quite straightforward these days, at least for a small area.
Sorry to make you run around. Do you have a best guess for how much carbon has been sequestered at Woodford?
No, sorry. not even like I haven't even started. Like, yeah, right now I'm on the process of collecting different plots, right? And then once we start doing that, then I'll fly. And once I fly and I combine those data sets, then I'll have a more. But to do that, also I need to know what trees are there, because kind of like you need a specific equation per tree species, right? And again, I know nothing about trees, so I need someone to tell me that's that, right? So that's what I love as well, because no one on itself can do this work. It has to be a group, like a combined effort. So you need that person, and that's why I love Woodfordia, because the community here are amazing. Like you have people all year long, like weeding and planting and doing stuff, and they really know this country, as much as anyone can. So I love talking to everyone and understanding what's what. Once I have that knowledge, I can map out different areas, and eventually I will be able to extrapolate and have so much carbon easier. But it's a long process. So especially if I spend half of my time on a beach. So yeah, I come here 3 times a year. So yeah.
Excellent presentation, Professor Javier. Thank you. Once you've mapped an area, and perish the thought here at Woodford, but once you've mapped an area and there's a bushfire, can you then go in and map what's left and extrapolate what's occurred?
Yes, yes, and that makes it even more fun. So again, it's that we are only starting to understand those dynamics, because now we have the technology to map these areas. So now we're starting to look more into long-term kind of like dynamics and what happens when there's a fire, what happens with different seasons and all of those things. So there's a few sites across Australia where we have like long-term plots and people have been monitoring there, but Australia is a big country, and there's only 4 of them. So we're trying to put one more, but still, it sounds like, sometimes I look at this and I'm like, oh, we have a lot of work to do, which makes it fun. But yeah, I think this is only starting, but also I think that it's going to grow exponentially. So, like now we're at a point where we have the technology, we have the computers. Now we're going to be seeing more and more of this growing exponentially. And instead of waiting for the next 20 years, I think in the next 5 years we will learn more than what we've learned on the last 20. So I think that's what's happening. So it's very exciting. And even as a non-tree person, I found this amazing, because all the time, it's literally every week something comes out. It's like, oh, we've been able to map larger areas, better areas, more detail. So yeah, that's where we are at.
Hi, my name is Michelle. I'm over here. Hey.
There you go.
I'm just wondering, you were talking about you didn't know which species were here at Woodfordia. Have you ever thought about doing it as a citizen science project with people here
Yeah.
with like naturalists or something like that,
Yeah.
and then combining?
A million times. That's how I actually started. I thought it was going to be easier, but the data that a citizen science collects, which usually it's like a photo, what's the app called?
iNaturalist.
Yeah, iNaturalist. It was really hard to translate that to a drone map, so to a drone imagery. Now it's easier. So I literally have a master's student starting that in 2 months' time, trying to reconcile the iNaturalist photos to the drone imagery. So once we do that, then suddenly that, again, it's one of these leaps. So once we do that, then suddenly we have all of these species that we know are around here. So I think that's going to become faster and easier to do in the future. And that's what I'm hoping. That's what I said 5 years ago as well. I'm like, sure, we'll use all of this data and all of this knowledge and yeah. But I do think now we're in a really good position to integrate that. And that's what I love about it. It's like we're, like taking literally every person is taking a photo and then we're using these like larger like maps and we're just like combining them, scaling up.
I was going to say, I do this almost part-time as a volunteer, so come and see my talk tomorrow here at 3.
For sure.
I guess this is a philosophical question. We know from the world scientists' second warning that between 1992 and 2017, the world lost about 100 million hectares of forest. And we haven't been able to get any sort of response to loss on that scale. It might be nice to know how many trees there are per hectare so we can tell them how many billion trees we've lost. But do you worry that our failure to engage with the decision makers means that we're simply documenting in mind-numbing detail the destruction rather than getting any political momentum to halt the process and bend the curve, as we said during COVID, onto a trajectory that might, at least in principle, be sustainable?
Every night. Yeah. I think, so I've given up on looking kind of like vertically, I guess, up to policymakers and politicians. I hope everyone has voted today and voted well. So now I'm trying to look down, and I think that's probably a better approach. And I think today, my aim as a scientist, as an educator, is to use these type of technologies, which, they're amazing, to inspire the youth. I think that's the way to go. So it's all about looking at those coming generations and going like, now we have numbers. Look, we've screwed up big time, right? We can help, but at the end of the day, it's up to them as well, because that's the world they're going to be living with. So now I'm just looking from like, my son that has like 6 years old to like my uni students. That's where I stop. Like everything else, I really don't care that much. Yeah, and I think they will be the change.
I was wondering, can you use your existing database of Woodford to actually count the number of trees at Woodford? And then could you also expand on going from terrestrial LiDAR through aircraft LiDAR to drone LiDAR and any experience that you've had with that so far? Yeah, so no. So the existing data set I have is just from drones, so photogrammetry. So even though you can have an estimate, it's not great. The next step is, of course, using drone LiDAR. That's coming soon in the next, hopefully, months, maybe years. But then the whole project we are at the moment is that, like trying to link those scales. So like I can see this happening in the next 2-3 years where we will have an exact number of trees. And what I really want to do is actually show the positive impact that Woodfordia has had in the environment and go like, when this was acquired 30 years ago, it was just a paddock. It was just like, cattle. So this is how much carbon has been sequestered. This is how many trees, this type of trees. So those are the type of questions I really want to answer. And then so that people coming to the festival can actually see this. And actually, I want to take it one step further and just put all of this on VR. And people can walk and go like, this is how 30 years used to look like in the past. Look how this is looking now. And also look how it might look in the next 100 years, right? If we keep doing what we're doing, right? So I think that could inspire a lot. So that's my
longer-ish term plan, hopefully.
How can you, when the laser on the drone maps, can it like map, let's say, tiny inches of grass like this big?
No. The answer is no. So from a drone, probably not. But when you put it on a tripod, yes, definitely you can see each grass blade. Yeah, you can see a lot of detail. So literally you can see 3 mils. Every 3 mils it makes a point. So that's a lot of detail. That's my son, by the way. But that's not a question I ask you to ask me. That's a difficult one.
He's asking a Dorothy Dixon question. Just a quick question and then a comment. Can you use those sort of lasers like the robot ones they use in caves and in big manufacturing to do the ground stuff?
It's the same technology.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I don't know if you've seen a movie. That actually, I saw this movie a few years. This is a prequel to Predator, I think. No, not Predator. Alien. So it's have you seen this movie? It's like the one before Alien. Anyways, there's a scene there where this geologist, right, like comes into this area and he has this like sphere thing. He just throws and the thing just goes around mapping stuff, and then he has a map of the whole cave. When I saw that, like I think that was maybe 6 years ago, I was like, oh, you know, today you can do that.
Just a quick comment. I did a project using LiDAR, sentinel imagery, indices, and near map. Sorry, I don't want to be too technical. To do tree canopy, to model tree failure risk after storms, and it was actually quite interesting. It never really got anywhere because I wanted to apply for a grant, and you know how it is. But I had my students do almost exactly the same project, looking for carbon sequestration on the Gold Coast hinterland. So.
There you go. Was that recent?
Yeah, just as part of a GIS class.
Yeah,
Geographic
awesome.
Information Systems. It's
Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing here as well. So
it's such fun.
Same question, Sentinel. Now we get the hard questions. Okay.
I was just wondering why the terrestrial LiDAR you have to stop and let it scan, and on the drone you can continuously fly.
Level of detail. So as it scans around, you're getting like orders of magnitude more points than from a laser, which is just using this mirror, and it shoots a lot of beams. So you can get, you know, densities of like thousands of points per square meter. This other one is like millions, right? Like this is just insane. And that was a big bottleneck in the past. So when I first used one of these terrestrial scanners, like this is probably 15 years ago. That was the first time I used it. One, it was like 60 kilos, right? So I'm just bending like, so that didn't work. And two, you had to move it, you had to wait probably 5 to 10 minutes per scan. So imagine, you know, doing a forest that would have taken you like 35 years. So the one we have now does a cycle in like 30 seconds, right? So under a minute, and it's only 15 kilos. So I can carry it. So, and you can move heaps faster, but still it's limited to, you know, a normal kind of like maybe 1K. That's as much as you can do, but it's the technology in 10 years has, you know, so in the next 10 years, we're talking like throwing like actually dogs, like, have you seen those dogs, like robot dogs? They have laser as well. So in the near future, I can see very easily putting little animals or whatever, critters, and just like going like, you know, map the forest. Yeah.
Question or no? Okay. Thank you so much, Javier.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Just